This Real Estate Talk podcast is brought to you by Metropole Property Strategist and SQM Research. Each week, the show is produced in partnership with Australian Property Investor Magazine.
This is Real Estate Talk. We bring together Australia's leading property experts and present all the facts so you can make the right decision. That's why Real Estate Talk is your trusted voice for property investing. Now, here's your host, Kevin Turner.
Hello and welcome to another show. Michael Yardney says never buy a property sight unseen, and he's got some pretty compelling reasons why, and he shares them with us today. Seasoned investor Nyung Nguyen tells us how he made 10 years' income in 6 months. Impossible, you say? Well, just listen to how he did it, how he found the opportunity, and why you can do the same. Terry Ryder, our hotspotting expert, shares with us his latest report. Now, this report looks at the areas of oversupply. Terry explains what oversupply is and the effect it has on the market. Terry also shares information about the 2 danger situations or danger zones. Dr. Andrew Wilson, senior economist with the Domain Group, explains why he thinks this is one of the best winter property seasons we've ever seen. So when is the best time to sell? Well, Andrew's got some thoughts on that for you today. And finally, the debate about prices on auction properties continues to gather pace. Now there is a submission that calls on the Victorian Government to follow the lead of authorities in other states to open up the selling of property by auction to more transparency. Miriam Sandkuhler is behind a move to have auction reserves made public at the time of listing. Hear what she has in mind and how she sees it all working. All that and lots more today in the show, but first up, here's the news. And first up in the news this week, there's controversy around the licensing of commercial agents in Victoria. With more on this and back from his break, Kieran Clare from API Magazine. Welcome back, mate.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Very nice to be home, I
Good.
say.
Nice to have you here too. Okay, so what's this controversy about?
Well, now you might think that as the value of a property sale increased, there'd be more scrutiny applying to the agents handling the sale, but this may not be the case in Victoria for too much longer. The Real Estate Institute says the state government's proposal to remove agent licensing for large commercial transactions is illogical and ill thought out. The proposal is part of a raft of measures designed to reduce red tape, but the REIV says the move would greatly increase consumer risk and lower standards, creating a messy 2-tiered licensing system because agents dealing in commercial transactions below a certain amount will be licensed while others won't.
Okay, and remaining in Victoria, the Premier is feeling bullish about jobs on the back of a new strategic plan.
That's right, Kevin. Victorian Premier Dennis Napthine says the final release of the scheme known as Plan Melbourne will deliver more jobs, more transport choices, more homes and more lifestyle opportunities. Plan Melbourne has been designed to provide a city-shaping strategy for the capital through to 2050. The Victorian Government says the plan will help unlock land within existing urban areas and includes commitments to major transport projects.
Okay, and there is at least one industry body throwing water on claims of a property bubble, Kieran.
Yes, Kevin. Cooler heads are prevailing at the Australian Property Institute with its 32nd Property Directions Survey revealing most of its members believe price rises in Melbourne and Brisbane are the result of normal market movement and not indicative of a property bubble. API Victorian President Aldo Galanti says when current low interest rates are taken into account, the movement in prices is expected. Galanti also says, while price growth has slowed, we believe that significant falls in prices are unlikely. So as a property investor, Mr. Galanti just made it onto my Christmas card list. I'm Kieran Clare, and that's your news wrap for this week.
Big bonuses when you subscribe at realestatetalk.com.au and when you tell your friends about us. This is Real Estate Talk, your trusted voice for property investing.
Dr. Andrew Wilson, senior economist with the Domain Group, has said that this is the best winter market he's seen in a long time. You've seen a few markets too, Andrew. I don't want to sort of take a stab at your age here, but you have a fair bit of experience. You think this is a good market, and why?
Well, thankfully, we won't go into how many markets I've seen, Kevin. That could get a little bit uncomfortable, but nonetheless, look, we really are set up for one of the best winter markets, particularly on the eastern seaboard, that we've seen in a long time. Typically, of course, we see buyer activity waning over Easter. Buyers tend to focus, and sellers tend to focus on that autumn and spring market because the decision making is made either at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, and winter tends to be that in-between period. And of course there is issues to do with, colder weather and distractions from sporting events, and, a lot of people with higher priced properties actually take lengthy holidays in the middle of the year.
Yes.
So it has been a quiet period typically, but we are starting to see the cyclical factors overriding those seasonal factors this year. We have seen in Sydney and Melbourne record numbers of auctions for autumn, for the first 5 months of the year, and record numbers for May. So the trend continues to rise. My forward indicators are that we will continue to see very high numbers of properties put under the hammer over June. Clearance rates are still very strong in Sydney, so buyers are still active, and they're still quite solid in Melbourne as well. The other thing that is active in the market that shows us that perhaps we're going to have a very strong winter is that the prestige market, particularly that Sydney prestige market, is on the rise. Also, the Brisbane prestige market is up and running too. Now, I think that the sellers will be keen to take advantage of the buyers that are around at the moment, those trade-up buyers, and that's why I think we'll see, particularly eastern seaboard markets, very strong this winter, and we'll overshoot those typically subduing winter factors that keep the market quiet over those June, July, August months.
So what would your advice be to anyone who's got their property and they're thinking about marketing it? Is there a good or a bad time to be doing that?
Well, typically the market slows down over June. July is a quiet month, and then it starts to ramp up over August. But we are having very atypical. We have a very atypical environment at the moment. Markets are still strengthening. Buyers are still active. Sellers are still active. So maybe it's a factor that we're starting to miss this year, at least those seasonal aspects. People wanting to take advantage of the low interest rates. Prices are rising and consistently, so people wanting to take advantage of getting into the property market before prices rise any further. Yep. There's a lot of factors there, Kevin, I believe will keep this winter market ticking over, and at levels probably we've never seen before. Well,
here we are in June, and as you rightly said, that we don't get a lot more listings coming on the market until, say, around September. But it's always occurred to me that if I wanted to sell my house, I'd like to put it on when I'm under, say, less competition, which is right now.
Well, that's right, and the notion of seasonality is a little bit vague when we're talking about houses, because each house is different in its, it's in time and space and in its nature, and every buyer and seller has a different agenda and a different motivation. So it's not as though we're talking about oranges or apples, which are basically the same, and they have seasonal aspects to changes in prices. But it is that we get less stock over winter typically, and less higher price stock. So we tend to look like house prices are falling or not growing as fast over that period. But it is more about compositional issues that keep that price growth looking like it's lower. So, in fact, there are still buyers and sellers around, and this year we'll see more buyers and more sellers than I think we'll ever have seen before in a winter market, particularly on the eastern seaboard. It's just this convergence of factors that are really pushing that winter market along above its normal levels.
Senior economist with the Domain Group, Dr. Andrew Wilson. Great talking to you as always. So thanks for your time, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Lots more to come after the break. Michael Yardney tells us why you should never buy a property sight unseen. This is Real Estate Talk.
The golden rule in real estate is buy well, knowing what to look for, where to look and when to buy. Smart investors and those wanting to know where the property market is headed turn to Australian Property Investor magazine. Hotspots, success stories, case studies and market intelligence from Australasia's leading property experts. Get it all inside Australian Property Investor. Look for API and all good newsagents or subscribe online at apimagazine.com.au. Australian Property Investor, the magazine for smart homeowners and property investors.
Get all the property news and information about the real estate market right here at Real Estate Talk, your trusted voice for property investing.
There are a number of thoughts about how you can actually take emotion out of your property purchase. No doubt that you need to, but one of those schools of thought is that you can actually buy sight unseen. You can do all your internet research, and you can actually buy it at arm's length. But Michael Yardney from Metropole Property Strategist says that is a surefire recipe for disaster. He joins us. Michael, you're not in favour of sight unseen?
No, Kevin, look, I can understand why we do have to take the emotion out of it, and clearly buying sight unseen could open up your opportunities to buy not just in your backyard, but to me, I agree, I think it's a sure recipe for disaster, because in my mind, buying a property sight unseen doesn't show you the intricacies of each property. You can do virtual tours on the internet. You can download all the statistics. But how many times have you seen a property really look good when those agents take the wide-angle photos and do the virtual tours? But when you eventually get to inspect the property, Kevin, it's nothing like what you expected.
Even putting aside the property itself, Michael, the area itself too, you can do so much research on the internet, but you certainly can't beat walking around the neighbourhood and getting a feel for what's there and what's actually coming.
Very much so, and that's a level of perspective that one needs to make a decision. Look, I know some great streets in Sydney where if you're on the north side of the street, you've got magnificent views of the harbour and the water and even a glimpse of the bridge. And if you're on the south side of the street, you've got magnificent views of the houses on the north side of the street. They've got views of the harbour and the bridge. And in fact, just across the road, one side from the street to the other, there's a 25% price differential. I can think of a property I went to a number of years ago that looked really good on the internet, but in fact, when we got there, there was an electric substation next door. And that's the reason why it was the perceived bargain, it was cheaper, but it didn't show up because it wasn't on your title and you wouldn't have necessarily even seen it on the street view.
Of course, there are some commodities you can buy sight unseen. It's because they're all pretty much the same, and I'm referring here to shares, Michael.
Oh, of course you can, yeah. Look, one BHP share is much the same as the other, but clearly each property isn't the same in the same street, and even within the neighbourhood, within in your own suburb, there's areas where you'd live in and areas where you wouldn't live in. So it does make it harder because, in my view, probably less than 5% of properties are what I'd call investment-grade properties. So you need to know much more than just the big picture area. You actually have to walk the streets, walk the suburb and look into the property, Kevin.
Yeah. Well, Michael, surely as a portfolio grows and starts to diversify, purchasing property by going to physically inspect it does actually become difficult. Is there a solution to all of this?
Yes, there is. And Kevin, you're going to say I've got a vested interest, but it would be to use a buyer's agent as part of your team, acting for you and levelling the playing field, Kevin.
No, I don't think that there's a problem with that at all, Michael. We all know that you are a buyer's agent, but have you got any examples of how it can really work positively for an investor?
Really good example was just recently we recommended one of our clients from Melbourne buy a property in Sydney because he'd already had a couple of properties in Sydney. And interestingly, I know he even sent an email to George in our Sydney office, George Raptors, to say, hey, go have a look at this property. And some of our clients want to do some of the research themselves as well. And it looked good on the internet. And when our buyer's agent went out there and had a look at it, she actually liked the block from the outside. She actually liked the position in the block until she walked inside. And then the floor plan seemed to initially tick all the right boxes until they saw that the living room itself didn't have any natural light. The main living area was back around the corner somewhere. So it wasn't as valuable, that property, because it was a bit dark and dingy compared to another one in the same block. It probably would have made a difference of, I don't know, $25,000 to $35,000, maybe even $40,000 less. So we walked away and didn't buy it. Somebody did buy it. Kevin, I hope they didn't just buy it sight unseen over the internet.
Yeah, there are probably so many more lessons too about this, but I guess it does come down to, whether you do it yourself or you have someone else doing it for you, you've really got to be very careful and do your due diligence, Michael.
Definitely. So therefore, it does come at a cost using somebody else as part of your team, but actually it's not a cost. In my mind, it's an investment. If you're the smartest person in your team, you're in trouble. It's hard enough to even look in Melbourne. I only know half a dozen suburbs well myself. I have other people in my team who know it elsewhere. You need somebody with that sort of perspective, on the ground perspective. And to me, it's you're either going to pay the market a learning fee by making the mistakes, or you pay a buyer's agent a fee as a form of insurance to protect you from making those mistakes, Kevin.
I know probably which one's going to be the cheapest too, Michael.
Look, when I first started off investing, I thought I had to do it all myself. And I think there were two reasons, Kevin. It's something that was sort of dug into me by my father to say, you learn from your mistakes. And maybe the other one was because I was a bit cheap and I didn't want to pay other people. Boy, did I learn some expensive mistakes when I was young, Kevin.
Yeah, indeed. Wonderful. Michael Yardney from Metropole Property Strategist. Michael, thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Kevin.
Out of every 100 people who are looking at property, only 5 will be satisfied to buy after seeing less than 10 properties. This has more than doubled in the last 5 years due to the amount of information available and the ability for buyers to become a lot more educated about the value and availability of properties without having to contact an agent. In fact, more than 50% of all buyers will never buy because it's estimated that 30% are gathering information to help them understand how much their property's worth, or they may be deciding if they should extend or renovate the property instead of buying another one. Another 25% are just curious and they like to look at property. Out of the same 100 buyers, 20 will buy after seeing more than 20 properties, with some needing to see as many as 50, and 20 will buy after seeing between 10 and 20 properties. More tips on buying and selling at realestatetalk.com.au. Still lots more to come. Young Ewan joins us with his incredible story of wealth building in just a moment. Also Terry Ryder and details of his report. But up next, Miriam Sandkuhler tells us how she thinks auctions should be conducted. This is Real Estate Talk.
Successful property investors need reliable and timely information. SQM Research is trusted by many financiers, developers and investors for industry benchmark reports, in particular the SQM Research Desktop Home Valuations tool that individually generates valuations of a property. This interactive product allows you to tailor a dollar price on a property using comparative sales data. It's the most economically priced and most accurate in the market. Get your hands on it at sqmresearch.com.au.
We bring all the property experts together every week. This is Real Estate Talk, your trusted voice for property investing.
In recent weeks, there has been a lot of talk, both in the real estate industry and from buyers and sellers, about price ranging, about prices at auction. There's a new petition that's just been raised, which is lobbying the Victorian Government to do something quite positive about this. With the message, Miriam Sandkuhler from Property Mavens joins me. Miriam, I know you're driving this, but can you give me the background and why you've raised a petition and what you hope to achieve by it?
Sure, Kevin. Well, what we're finding in the marketplace, underquoting is quite rife down here. Underquoting is when prices advertised are substantially below what the agent knows the property to be worth, based on recent sales evidence and what they know the vendor will accept. So it's quite common practice in the beginning of a campaign to quote very low, to give buyers an indication as to what they think it'll go for. That gives the buyer a confidence to proceed with getting building and pest inspections done and paying for contracts to be reviewed, only to find out that the reserve price at auction is substantially below the quote, above the quote range, and then the property consequently sells for a lot more.
I know the practice is quite widespread, not only in Victoria but right throughout Australia. I think wherever auctions are conducted, two purposes in that. One is to what's called in the industry lowball, or to get feed the greed, to get the buyers involved and then work them up, and also as an exercise to get the sellers down. It is quite an uncultured type of practice, I think, and understanding why you'd want to rule that practice out. Do you think publishing the reserve is actually going to achieve that?
Well, the practice you've described is very old school, and I think the general public are tired of it.
Yes.
By amending current legislation to force vendors to declare the reserve price and also estate agents to publish their vendors' reserve price will actually result in drawing buyers to the property who are actually within that price point. So straight away you're eliminating people that are never in a position to be able to afford it. You're being transparent to the marketplace. You're drawing those people that can afford it, and you still have the capacity to run an auction and allow for competition at auction on the day. So by declaring the absolute minimum a vendor will accept, it doesn't mean that they can't get a heck of a lot more with competition. It just means you're getting the right people to that property to allow for that.
One of the things that sellers want to do when they go to auction is to achieve that premium price, which is what agents tell them the auction is all about. Whether that's right or not, that's another debate, I guess. But doesn't publishing the reserve take away that opportunity for them to do just that?
Well, you could see it that way, but it's not a cap on what they'll take for it. It's just the absolute minimum they'll take. Because in reality, at an auction, when you reach the reserve, people don't suddenly just stop and not keep going. If there's competition, they keep going. And if a property falls or passes in at auction, it means that reserve has never been met and people aren't prepared to go up that in the first place. So the whole process has failed. So the auction system isn't perfect. It doesn't work perfectly now as it is. I think agents tend to use it because it's an easy method of selling to try and get an unconditional result within a certain period of time, and they get vendor marketing to do that. So it's a practice that's basically despised by so many buyers. And on the petition that we've got going on change.org, within 24 hours I've had 20% of the signatures that we need. So I've had over 208 supporters. And the comments there are amazing in terms of what people are saying their experience is.
What are they saying?
Oh, one lady, we lost 6 properties due to underquoting. We ended up negotiating and buying privately. Underquoting is clearly misleading and deceptive conduct. I understand that it's an offence for an agent to falsely understate the estimated selling price in New South Wales and South Australia. Why not here? What about vendor bids? Well, it isn't legal to do it here either. It's just easier for agents to get away with it here because they've found the loopholes in the system that perpetuate it.
I wonder how a seller would feel if let's hypothetically say a property is listed, the auction reserve is published at $500,000. They turn up at the auction, and in fact the bidding, gets up to say $600,000 because there's fierce competition. How would the successful bidder feel knowing they've paid over $100,000 more than the reserve or the price at which the seller would have taken?
Well, they're going to understand that under competitive conditions, that's what can happen. But the main thing is they've arrived at the auction knowing what the absolute minimum is, and under auction conditions with other people there interested in the property, if that's what they've had to spend to compete to secure the outcome, well, then that's a totally transparent and appropriate process.
One of the other questions I'd like to ask you too, Miriam, is what you're suggesting here is almost akin to putting a property on the market with a listed price. I mean, you are publishing what the seller will take, which is what is done in private treaty. Just from your experience, how many people would pay over the asking price for a property that's listed at a price?
Well, again, it comes down to competition. So I've been in situations where there's been a price range on a property.
Yes.
And under
that's a different thing, though, isn't it? We're not talking about price ranging here. We're talking about a price.
Okay, well, so a price on a property, it's basically a similar situation where if you pay that price on that day, the vendor can choose to sell it. Just like at an auction, a vendor can choose to sell prior to auction. So in this instance, if they put down a minimum price they'll accept, it doesn't stop offers being presented before auction, which currently happens anyway.
Yes.
It doesn't stop them from selling before auction, which currently happens anyway. But with sufficient interest and communication from their agent, the advice might be, look, there's plenty of interest, let's take it to auction and let it run on the day. And that's appropriate advice.
Miriam, I know what you're trying to do is clean up the industry, and I sort of endorse that 110%. I think anything we can do to clarify the situation for buyers and sellers and make the whole thing a lot more transparent is certainly to the good of the industry. Anyone who wants to support you in that petition, how can they get to it and how can they sign on?
So it's change.org. All they need to do is search and just search Vic Government underquoting or Vic VIC underquoting. The petition will pop up and they just need to sign on with it to support it and ideally share it on Facebook and via email and tell as many people as possible. That'd be great.
All the best with that, Miriam. And thank you very much for joining us today, Miriam Sandkuhler from Property Mavens. Thanks for your time, Miriam.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kevin. Bye.
I was talking to Nyung Nguyen the other day, of course, Nyung from Advanced Property Strategies, and he was telling me that he's made 10 years' income in the last 6 months. What was the deal? How did he do it? He joins us. G'day, Nyung. How are you?
Hey, Kevin. How's it going?
Good. It sounds almost too good to be true.
Mate, in some ways, it was too good to be true. No, mate, this is a culmination of many years' work, and what I mean by that, the deal did only take me 6 months, but all the tips and tricks that I did were from the last 10 so years of doing deals, and I've been able to use all the skills that I have in negotiations to pull it off in a short period of time when normally, had I done that 10 years ago, it would have taken me a year, 2 years, maybe even 5 years to pull it off.
So what was the deal?
Mate, basically, it was 1 acre, 4,000 square metres, which had 3 street frontage, and it was in a suburb on the south side of Brisbane, about 12, 13 k's out. And with 3 street frontage, I was able to cut the block of 4,000 metres into 9 blocks of roughly 400 square metres each. And because we had the 3 street frontage, I could see that the opportunity was to not have to provide much road frontage at all. Actually, I didn't, because all the blocks had road frontage, and that cut my development costs significantly.
How do you find these deals?
Mate, one of those things, people always ask, how do you find these kind of deals? I was actually researching in the area for a property that was across the road of this. My parents live in this suburb, and I've been going to the suburb as a kid because my grandparents used to live there while they were alive, and I was researching on another property of my cousin's, which is across the road, and it came up. And so I found it by accident. It was on the top of realestate.com.au, and I found it by accident, saw it, wow, the Google map showed me 3 street frontage, and I jumped on it, and it said submit all offers. I rang the agent. The agent said, mate, submit all offers. They're all open for offers. And the agent said it was offers over $800,000. And initially, I didn't really want to offer that, so I gave him a cheeky offer. I think I offered in the 600s with a quick settlement, call it 30, 60 days, and an alternative offer of $805,000 with a 12-month subject to due diligence and subject to development approval.
Yeah,
contract.
So I suppose with the two offers, you made the one you really wanted them to take the most attractive?
Exactly. And it made my offer look really attractive, and it's just, I know with people, when you give them options, they like to choose. They like to have some control to choose. It's like, would you like a lemonade or a can of Coke? So people like to choose, and they feel like they're in control. And that was really the one that I was hoping they'd take. And even though we had to come up with a little bit more money, I ended up paying $835,000. I got roughly a 6-month settlement, and that allowed me to do some of the approval work and take the risk out of the project.
Did you know that it was going to work right from the get-go?
No, to be honest with you, I didn't. All I knew was that with 4,000 square metres, mathematically, if you divide that by 400 square metres, which is the minimum lot size in Brisbane, speaking generally, I knew I was going to probably lose a block due to truncations or council resumptions, and that's what happened. And because I didn't know it was a sure thing, and it wasn't, therefore I had a get-out clause or escape clause called a due diligence clause, and I was able to pull out within the first 120 days if things didn't go to plan and if I didn't get my approval.
You did this with no money down, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was able to get some bank funding of roughly $700,000 or so, and I was able to get investors to tip in the rest of the money, fund the project. So personally, I didn't put any money in, and so, you could call that no money down.
Did you get commercial funding for the project?
No, I didn't actually. I wanted to, but the constraints were a bit onerous at that point in time. So one of the tips that I generally like to tell people when you're doing a deal is if you can, get a valuation before you buy the property. And because I had 6 months up my sleeve with this contract, once I was close to getting the development approval within the first 4 months, I got a valuation done before I went to the bank. And then once I got that valuation, then I went to the bank, which I knew would be happy with that valuation, and then I kind of worked in a reversed process. I knew what the valuation was, and then they were able to give me residential finance of just 80% LVR against the property.
Because one of the major keys in making this thing work, I guess, was getting those investors on board. How did you do that?
Mate, that's a really, really good question. I think part of it was I had another investor, a doctor who's been working with me for a while, and he tipped in $160,000. Most people have risk profiles, so when they know that some other people have tipped in money, they're happy with that, and also it had a development approval. By the time they had to stump up the funds, the site already had an approval, and it had some investors on board, and they could see that the project was, the concept was great, 3 street frontage, they could see the wow factor in it, it was flat, it wasn't flooded, and I had a bit of a track record, so that really helped as well.
Look, our listeners love hearing these success stories, Young, and I appreciate you sharing that one with us. We're going to come back in a couple of weeks' time. There's another one I want to talk to you about as well. My guest has been Young Nguyen from Advanced Property Strategies, and you can get him. That's the website as well. And Young, thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Straight after the break, Terry Ryder will tell us about his brand new report and some of the danger areas. Stick around for that. That's coming up in just a moment. This is Real Estate Talk.
In any game, there has to be a plan to win and some rules to follow. The property game is the same. Not having a plan is crazy, but most investors don't know what the rules are. Now there's no excuse. Michael Yardney has listed all 56 rules in his new book, Rules of Property. This is the property investment book for beginners, experienced investors wanting to move to the next level, and professionals who want to revisit the basics. Get your copy of Michael Yardney's Rules of Property now at any good bookstore or rulesofproperty.com.au.
Build a life richer and warmer than hot chocolate.
Wake happy. Sleep content.
Read the free Property Investor's Guide.
You'll learn the 10 biggest mistakes made by property investors.
How to spot a shark in a suit.
The process to find the best investment property.
Why you should always buy below the median house value.
Read the free Property Investor's Guide.
It's a mini guide,
Packed with good stuff.
easy to read.
Get your free copy at Open Wealth Creation.
Visit openwealthcreation.com.au.
Big bonuses when you subscribe at realestatetalk.com.au and when you tell your friends about us. This is Real Estate Talk, your trusted voice for property investing.
Property is, in most cases, the most important and expensive purchase you'll make in your life. So, therefore, you need to do your homework before you buy. The major concern for most buyers is that they don't want to pay over market price for a property, and that's fair enough. So for that reason, sellers need to do as much work as buyers before they list their property for sale. Pricing a property too high and hoping people will come along just wastes time and could mean that the purchaser, who might have paid you a premium because it's their dream home, might be turned away and attracted to another property that's better value than yours. More tips on buying and selling at realestatetalk.com.au. My good friend Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au joins me once again. G'day, Terry.
Hello, Kevin.
Terry, you've a new report, Oversupply Alert, the top 10 markets to avoid and the 5 markets to treat with caution. A great read, a new report that's out from Terry at his website. Terry, could you firstly explain what oversupply is?
Generally, the rule of thumb in residential property is that vacancy rate of about 3% is what you'd call equilibrium, where supply and demand's in good balance. If it's significantly less than 3%, you're probably talking shortage, and you would expect rentals to be rising in that circumstance. If it's well over 3%, that's when you're getting into the area of oversupply.
I know you've analysed the market and you've come up with the top 10 markets to avoid. Are there many markets in that bracket, in that worse than 3%?
Well, yes. All of the ones in the top 10 to avoid are well above 3%. Most of them you'd be talking 5-6%, and in some cases 10% plus.
Yeah.
And once you're up in the double digits, you're talking about a serious oversupply where you're going to see rentals falling quite sharply.
Is there a market that you can pick out, that is an all-time outstand market for you that at some stage was like really oversupplied?
The Melbourne inner city apartment market is probably the standout market in Australia.
Yeah.
Two things stand out there, and one is that it's already very, very much oversupplied, but the really big factor is that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, because there are multiple mega towers now under construction and more in planning. They just keep throwing up new ones and putting forward new plans and keep building them, even though there's already 8 or 10% vacancies in some of those inner city areas in Melbourne because they think they can sell them to Chinese investors.
There's an obvious outcome for oversupply, but what is the effect on the market, the true effect on the market of oversupply?
Well, can be quite a dramatic effect. The first and obvious impact of oversupply is that rentals fall, but the consequence of rentals falling ultimately will be that values will fall as well. So if you have a serious oversupply, it's up around 10%, and it persists long term, then you're going to see values starting to drop. And perhaps the most dramatic example of that in the country in recent times is Miriam, the coal mining town in central Queensland, where median weekly rents were about $1,500 a week when things were booming, and they're now down to about $400 a week. And we've seen prices, median house price, drop from about $750,000 to something like $400,000. So quite dramatic declines on the back of very high vacancies.
Well, talking about Murrumbidgee, can you tell us about the 2 danger situations or danger zones that you mentioned in your report?
Yeah, the common theme that runs through the list of 10 markets to avoid and 5 to treat with caution, 2 situations. One is inner city apartments, and the ones that stand out, we mentioned Melbourne, but also Brisbane and Perth have quite high vacancies. I'm a little bit concerned that Darwin and Sydney are heading down the same path. So that's one situation, and really urge investors to be very careful if they're thinking about buying inner city apartments anywhere in Australia at the moment. The other situation that's common is markets that are impacted by the coal mining industry. Central Queensland stands out, a number of locations there very much affected. but not just central Queensland, also in New South Wales, the Hunter Valley, for example, has had exactly the same thing happen.
It's a great report. What else can we expect to see in there apart from your analysis of the top 10 markets to avoid?
Well, we're talking about markets that currently don't show up as being oversupplied at the moment, but we think are going to head down that path. So the 5 markets to treat with caution. We could have added a few more there, but we chose 5. A couple again are in the city markets. We think Sydney right now, the vacancy factors in the Sydney CBD and the near city suburbs are quite low at the moment, but developers are obviously wanting a piece of the action they see happening in Melbourne, building high-rise apartments and selling them to Chinese investors. And if all the projects that are proposed or under construction actually come into the market over the next 5 years, Sydney is going to have an oversupply there as well.
I've heard it said, and I think you mentioned in your report too, that if you're a wise investor, you'll simply follow what the Chinese do. I think that's probably some of the worst advice you could ever get.
Well, that's right. That's particularly coming out of the Gold Coast, saying you should be buying on the Gold Coast because the Chinese investors are, and they do lots of research. But that's, I think, very, very misleading. The Chinese aren't seeking out the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast is actually seeking out the Chinese. Road shows are going up to Peking and Guangzhou and other cities up in China and marketing high-rise apartments in Melbourne and the Gold Coast and Sydney to Chinese investors in the hope that they're unaware of local market conditions and probably, in some cases at least, they're selling at inflated prices. So you've got a two-tiered market emerging there as well.
Terry Ryder, and that report is called Oversupply Alert. It's on his website, hotspotting.com.au. Terry, always a pleasure to talk, and thanks for your time.
You're most welcome, Kevin.
I want to thank our contributors in the show today, Dr. Andrew Wilson, Michael Yardney, Miriam Sandkuhler, Nung Nguyen, Terry Ryder, and Kieran Clare. Real Estate Talk is produced each week in partnership with Australian Property Investor magazine. The podcast is brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists and SQM Research. I'm Kevin Turner. Thanks for being with us, and watch out for us in your inbox next weekend.
Follow us at Twitter, Facebook and YouTube as Real Estate Talk. If you have a question for any of our property experts or would like us to cover a particular subject, just let us know through the website realestatetalk.com.au. Subscribe at the site and receive some great bonuses. Tell your friends about us and receive even more gifts. Real Estate Talk is produced free each week to help you with your property investment decisions. The views, thoughts and opinions expressed by the guests in Real Estate Talk should not be relied upon as financial or investment advice. You should always seek the opinion of a trusted advisor about your individual needs. Real Estate Talk, your trusted voice for property investing.